Directions. Determine each type of question: prediction, inference, detail, big picture, or connection. Shade the question the correct color. Answer each question using complete sentences. Shortish Story number 2. Hector had been driving all night on the dark back roads of Missouri. He'd been lost for hours. When he left his home in Kansas City for this road trip, the thought of leaving all his technology behind and living in the moment had sounded like an adventure. After 11 hours of being lost in the middle of nowhere, he was starting to wish he'd brought a cell phone, if only so he could use Google Maps and find some place to sleep. All he wanted to do was sleep. He was getting ready to pull his car over to the side of the road for a nap when he saw a light in the distance. Thank God. Even if it was only a farmhouse, they'd have a phone. They could give him directions to the next town. Hector drove towards the light. Finally, he arrived at the farmhouse. At the entrance to the gravel driveway, there was a charming hand-painted sign that read, "Bender and Borden, Bed and Breakfast. Rooms for rent. Inquire within, day or night." Hector couldn't park his car quickly enough. He ran up the steps of the old front porch and knocked on the door. He was ready to apologize for waking up the owner, but when she opened the door, he could hear a radio playing. "Hello, dear," the sweet old lady said. "My, it's late. Would you like to rent a room? You look exhausted. I'm Mrs. Ellis, but you can just call me Granny. What's your name, child?" Hector said, "and yes, I would love to rent a room. I've been driving all night and I feel like I could fall asleep standing up." "Hector," Granny said, "what a lovely name. Old-fashioned. I'll bet you come from good people. Let's get you up to a room." Hector paused. "I guess I should ask how much the room costs," he said. "Honestly, I don't have much money. I don't want to take the room and not be able to afford to pay you. I'd feel really bad." Granny laughed. "Oh, I'm not worried about money," she said. "We mostly rent rooms for the fun of it. Morris, that's my husband, and I would be bored to tears if we only got to talk to each other. You just pay whatever you could afford to pay. It's good for us to have some fresh blood in the house. Keeps us young." Granny made her way slowly up the stairs. Hector followed. She opened the door to a cozy bedroom. The bed was covered in soft quilts. It looked like heaven to Hector. Granny had barely closed the door behind her before Hector was asleep. "Rise and shine, sleepyhead," Granny chirped. "What time is it?" Hector asked groggily. "After 10. My, you really were exhausted," Granny said. "Let's get you down to the dining room for a nice hot breakfast." "That sounds amazing," Hector said. "Thank you so much." When Hector sat down in the dining room, Granny's husband Morris was already there. He was drinking a cup of coffee and reading through a cookbook, marking pages with little scraps of paper. "Good morning, young man," Morris said. "I hope you slept well." "I did, thank you," Hector replied. "So I see you've got a cookbook. Do you like to cook?" "Oh, I'm not bad in the kitchen," Morris said. "It's really about the quality of the ingredients. As long as the ingredients are fresh, it's hard to mess things up." "Well, whatever you guys are cooking this morning smells amazing," Hector said. "Is that sausage?" Morris smiled. "Something like that," he said. "I was wondering about the name of your bed and breakfast," Hector said. "It's called Borden and Bender, but your last name is Ellis. How did you come up with the name?" "We named it Borden and Bender to honor some families we really respect," Morris said. "It's sort of aspirational." Granny came in carrying a huge tray piled with food. "Dig in," she said. "You're too skinny, Hector. Let's put some meat on those bones." Hector took a big bite of meat. This is delicious," Hector said. "How do you make it?" "It's a family secret," Morris said teasingly. "If I told you, I'd have to kill you." Hector laughed. "Well, I really appreciate you letting me stay here and answering the door when it was so late at night," Hector said. "I'd like to give you guys a hand today. If you got chores you need done, I'd like to help you out for a few hours before I hit the road." We wouldn't hear of it, Granny exclaimed. We want you to take a seat by the fire and get nice and relaxed. No point in getting all tensed up now. Granny was juggling a box full of canning jars. At least let me carry those jars for you, Hector said. It's the least I can do. Morris sighed. Well, Granny, Morris said, I guess there's no keeping the boy from giving us a hand. Hector, just take that box right on down to the basement. I'll follow you and show you where to put it. The stairs to the basement were creaky and dark. At the bottom, Morris turned on a single light bulb. In front of him, Hector saw a line of chest freezers. There were at least 6 of them. Wow, that's a lot of freezers, Hector said. Well, you know how it is out here in the country, Morris said. You have to put away your food when you can. We like to have plenty of meat on hand. Granny hates to run out. Something about Morris's tone sent a shiver down Hector's spine. Hector shifted the box of jars uncomfortably. So where do you want these jars? Hector said nervously. I probably ought to get going. Hector turned just in time to see Morris swinging a sledgehammer right at his head. Hector didn't have time to react. He was on the ground before he could even scream. Sorry, Morris said, but the only place you're going is into that freezer over there. All right, here's the first part of the assignment. This story is all about foreshadowing. Go back through the story now that you've finished it. Highlight all the examples of foreshadowing or clues about what Granny and Morris would do to Hector at the end of the story. All right, let's talk through the writing prompt. Follow the steps below to write a paragraph on the following topic. What truth about Granny and Morris is revealed at the end of the story? First, write one sentence that explains what happens to Hector at the end of the story. Write a second sentence that gives one piece of text evidence that foreshadows the ending. Write a third sentence that explains why the evidence you chose proves that your inference is correct. Write a fourth sentence that gives another piece of text evidence that foreshadows the ending. Write a fifth sentence that explains why the second piece of evidence you chose proves that your inference is correct.